Hello and welcome to TVS Correspondent, the show where we take a look at what's happening in the US and around the world. I am Radzi Ahmad, and with me is our correspondent for the United States of America, who is now in Washington, D.C., Alfian Zaini. Alfian, always a pleasure.
Happy to see you too, Radzi.
Awesome. Yeah, the federal eviction moratorium that was due to end on the 31st of July has put several American lives at stake. On August 3rd, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, issued a new targeted eviction moratorium in counties most affected by the COVID-19 outbreak and saved millions of Americans from the risk of eviction. These counties are those that experience substantial and high levels of community transmitted COVID-19 cases, which will cover an estimated 90% of renters. The moratorium, effective for 60 days until October 3rd, came after a 5-day protest from progressive Democrats outside the U.S. Capitol building, headed by Congresswoman Cori Bush. Now, before we get into the eviction moratorium debacle, I'd like to get into the recession that the U.S. is now currently experiencing. Now, how severely has the pandemic and the renewed threat of the Delta variant affected the USA's economy, Alfia?
Right, Radzi. For starters, the recession caused by the COVID-19 pandemic is unprecedented in many ways. By many measures, this recession is the deepest since the Great Depression. The peak unemployment rate of 14.7% in April 2020 was the highest monthly rate recorded by the Bureau of Labor Statistics since after World War II. The second quarter of 2020 annualized declined in gross domestic product, or GDP, of 31.4%, was the highest single quarterly decline in real GDP recorded by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, BEA, since 1947. The rate of decline in economic activity was also very rapid, seemingly overnight, as states put down lockdown orders into effect, trade and travel were disrupted, and commerce screeched into a halt. The economy has improved since the worst month of the second quarter of 2020, but it is still not fully recovered. The realization that the Delta variant can infect vaccinated individuals is changing the way the US is handling the pandemic, with officials taking a step back and asking millions of citizens to resume wearing masks while reinstating other previous COVID-19 restrictions. If things go back to what it was last year, where lockdowns were mandated and businesses affected, it will adversely impact the economy yet again and cost a lot of Americans their jobs, or keep them unemployed and render them unable to pay their dues. Yeah.
It's small wonder that many Americans are now at risk of being kicked out of their homes, no thanks to the debilitating economic recession. Which brings me to ask, just how many Americans are at risk of being evicted?
More than 15 million people in 6.5 million US households are currently behind on rental payments, according to a study by the Aspen Institute and the COVID-19 Eviction Defense Project. They collectively owe more than $20 billion to landlords. Before the pandemic, evictions occurred frequently across the country. The eviction lab at Princeton University estimates that between 2000 and 2016, 61 million eviction cases were filed in the US, an average of 3.6 million evictions annually. However, according to the latest analysis of weekly US Census data, as federal, state, and local protections and resources expire, and in the absence of robust and swift intervention, an estimated 30 to 40 million people in America could be at risk of eviction in the very next several months.
That is quite a significant number of Americans who could potentially be rendered homeless if not for an intervention. The targeted moratorium is definitely good news for the renters, but on the flip side, I don't think the landlords would be too happy about this. Now, Fian, could you let us in on what were the responses from the landlords towards this extended moratorium?
As you say, Radzi, they didn't take this all too well, of course. Trade groups representing property owners late Wednesday last week sued to block the federal eviction moratorium. A coalition of 11 housing industry groups, including the Mortgage Bankers Association and the National Association of Home Builders, said in a statement that they opposed the new moratorium. According to the administration itself, noted that it lacks the legal authority for more targeted eviction moratorium. The plaintiffs also referenced the remarks made by President Joe Biden about courts possibly appending any new eviction policy, alleging that the administration knew the move would be unlawful. The landlords also said that they opposed the ban because they have lost billions of dollars each month under the original moratorium, which the Center for Disease Control first implemented in September. The group called the new eviction moratorium an unfunded government mandate that forces housing providers to deliver a costly service without compensation and saddles renters with unsurmountable amount of debt. Radzi. Yeah.
Well, there is always a flip side to every perceived act of kindness that the government takes in the effort to deal with the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, we'll be right back on TVS Correspondent after a short break with more on the eviction moratorium. Stay tuned. We're back on TVS Correspondent and still on the issue of the USA's new targeted eviction moratorium that intends to prevent millions of Americans from being evicted from their homes due to unpaid rent for at least another 60 days. The original CDC moratorium, which was put in place in September 2020 and kept millions of people from being forced out of their homes for unpaid rent during the pandemic, was extended for another 30 days in June, and officials at the time said it would be the final extension. But with COVID-19 rates climbing, some House Democrats, led by Representative Cori Bush, staged a protest outside the U.S. Capitol that put pressure on the administration to reverse course and protect renters at risk. Alfian, I want to ask you, was Congress in favor of the moratorium being extended? Would it not have been extended if it was not for the pressure from the Democrats and Congresswoman Cori Bush's 5-day protest?
Vice President Kamala Harris spoke with Bush Monday, a sign of the pressure the protests put on Biden's administration. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, though, said that Wednesday that the efforts made by Bush and other lawmakers had an impact on the president's decision to move forward with a new moratorium. But she also stressed that Biden first called for the extension of the original moratorium in January and shared a common goal with the lawmakers. Yeah.
Does the extension of this moratorium pose any negative implications to the U.S. economy, and is Congress considering further options?
The CDC put the initial eviction ban in place as part of the COVID-19 response when jobs shifted and many workers lost income. The ban was intended to hold back the spread of the virus among people put out on streets and into shelters, but it also penalized landlords who lost income as a result, which is also bad to the economy. So Congress set aside roughly $45 billion to make sure that a pandemic that wreaked havoc on the livelihood of millions wouldn't force families out of their homes through no fault of their own. This was no band-aid or short-term measure. Experts, renters, advocates, even landlords agreed that this was the solution. Money itemized explicitly for the purpose of helping people make rent. So more than half of it was allocated under the Trump administration and the rest under President Joe Biden. And yet, as the end of June, the most recent data the Treasury Department has made available shows only around 6.5% of that money has gone out the door. It's not for lack of trying, but we have allowed low-income tenants to exist at the peripheries of society and of our safety nets, to the point that reaching them, even when there is aid available, becomes a massive, expensive, and often impossible undertaking. One way to fix this is building up a national registry of renters. It's called National Rental Registry or a database. of some sort. It would be a big undertaking for the federal government to begin collecting all of this information, and still it would be worth it. A rental registry requires landlords to register their property with a governmental body and submit key pieces of information like the address of the property and contact information for the landlord. But it wouldn't be difficult to also require landlords to provide more detailed information, like how many tenants they are leasing out to, how many units in each property, and how much they are charging for rent.
Well, I hope that the moves would be implemented very soon. But overall, looking at this from the perspective of a Malaysian, what do you make out of all of this, Alfian? Would you agree that it is right for the moratorium to be extended?
Well, in my own opinion, of course, there's always two sides of the coin. Depending on whether you are a tenant or a landlord, I would say that the general public would agree to the extension just by the simple assumption that there are more tenants out there than there are landlords. Right?
Indeed, there are always two sides of the same coin, but one side is definitely in need of more protection, as the emergence of the Delta variant has led to a rapid acceleration of community transmission in the United States, putting more Americans at increased risk, especially if they are unvaccinated. This moratorium is the right thing to do to keep people in their homes and out of congregate settings where COVID 19 is spreading. Well, that's it for now on this edition of TVS Correspondent. Alfian, as always, thank you for your time.
Thank you, and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you for watching, everyone, and stay tuned to next week's edition. I am Radzi Ahmad with Alfian Zaini for TVS Correspondent. Stay safe, everyone. Bye bye.